All right, let's dive in. So, my name's Mike Rogers. I'm a Ruby developer from the UK. I I really love Docker. If anyone who follows me online, they're gonna notice I talk an awful lot about it. I sometimes do like little tutorials where in most of those tutorials I do use Docker just kind of as a baseline because it will work everywhere. And I really want to share it with everyone here because I really do believe it's like potentially a tool of the future, which if we all learn as Rails developers, we're going to have a really wonderful time. Just to kind of gauge the room, could you all like kind of throw up some emojis? Who has heard of Docker? Who's used it? Just kind of some thumbs up. Okay, cool. All right, nice. Cool. So Docker solved a lot of my development problems, and let's dive in. So, what are we going to cover in this talk? So, I'm going to kind of go through what we're trying to solve with Docker. What is Docker? How do we use Docker? What does Docker compose? And also, I'm going to tell you some of the drawbacks. The overall aim is just to give you some confidence in like what Docker is. So hopefully you just want to give it a try. So what are we trying to solve? So why have I pulled you here and why am I telling you Docker is amazing? I'm going to go through some of the development scenarios, which I think Docker would have helped had I done this in the past. They all are kind of true stories, so they all kind of happened, and hopefully we'll enjoy them. So yeah, I was working at a startup a few years ago, and we had a day where I wrote some code. I found a really nice function in Postgres, and I was like, I'm really excited about this. I'm going to use it. And I wrote my pull request, and it worked great for me. My colleague, it kind of worked great. They got some warning, but like that was fine. And then we went to push it to production, and yeah, it just like broke staging because turns out this function I'd found in the latest Postgres was not there. Turns out the way we were provisioning our machines was every developer would come in and they would just install Postgres using Brew, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it meant that we'd only have like the versions based on whatever time people started. So I had started quite recently. So I was running the latest version of Postgres. My other colleague had been there a while. And the server had actually been provisioned like 3 years ago, and no one had really bothered to update it. Had we been running Postgres, had we been running Docker, we could have told Postgres to be running a very particular version for everyone. And this would have literally solved our problem of like, we could have matched it to production and that particular function I thought was amazing. I could have run it and be like, oh, I don't have this available to me right now. That's no worries. Plus, I think we would have been more aware of how out of date our production Postgres was, that we were running a very old version. And we might have wanted to update it a bit sooner. The next story, this is totally true. So I started at a job. I was quite junior, and I went through the README, and there was instructions like, okay, clone the repo, go install these packages, and then run all these other commands, and then you'll have a working environment. Then run some other stuff. And it was not working for me. I was having like the worst day. I was at that age of like development where if I see error messages, I hate them. They scared the heck out of me. And when I'd Google stuff, like I'd end up on Stack Overflow where people would be like, "Hey, use sudo to solve this problem," and that would give me more problems. Turns out, when the person who wrote the README to set up the project, when they'd written it, they were on a different version of OS X. They'd never updated the README, and this meant that as a result, I pretty much ended up as a junior developer hiding in the toilet for 20 minutes. It's been this like, I'm so stressed. I need to take a break and almost like cry into a towel. Um, so, how we could have solved this? Well, it was an older project that was like fine, but had we had Docker, we could have had a like almost a snapshot in time which would have worked. So little me as a junior developer, I could have just been jumped in. I could have jumped in, and I could just have been running code like straight out the bat, and I wouldn't have had to go through all the hell of like installing random packages I didn't know what they were, and that would have been a lot better, I think. Okay, let me go here. Um, the last story I've got is my biggest fear. Throw up your emojis if you've ever been asked to work on a project where you don't really know the language. Like, it doesn't have to be COBOL. Maybe someone's like, "Hey, do you want to work on some PHP or something like that?" Yeah, we've all had that experience, and I think it's really common, and we should all be kind of wary of it. But my big fear is I'm gonna have to run some language. I'm not gonna know anything about it. I'm gonna have to be searching information. Maybe it's gonna have like a really generic name, and I won't be able to exactly find what I need to get. And I'm gonna have like a small change, which is gonna be really hard to do because of this. If we have Docker installed, I can just be like, okay, I don't need to know how to set up this project. I just have to be able to run one command to turn on the Docker server, and it'll just work in theory. Which I think is quite nice. I think like we're kind of like future proofing ourselves a bit, which is quite cool. So seriously, like what is Docker? What is this thing I'm like really telling you is amazing? Like I haven't really told you too much about it other than it's great. But it is a piece of software you can install and you can pretty much download and run little virtual computers within your computer in a kind of nice, consistent way. Like that's not like the best definition. There's like a more accurate one online, but I feel like this is a nice simplistic one, which works really well based on how I kind of think. So I like that. So yeah, what is Docker? So there is also some terminology as well. So you're going to hear me kind of throw this out in the next 10, 15 minutes or so. So just kind of be aware of it. You have images in Docker. They are almost an equivalent of ripping a hard drive out of a computer at like one point and just taking a snapshot so you can use that same hard drive multiple times. So by that, I mean, like, imagine you installed a computer, you got it exactly to the perfect point, you installed all the packages needed to run your app, and then you just like froze your hard drive in time and said, okay, going forward, I'm always going to like be here. This is where I'm going to start from, and it's always going to go back to here when I'm done. That is like the best way to think of an image. And then you have like containers. They are the thing which run the images. That is like kind of a standardized way of doing it across multiple like operating systems. Finally, Alpine Linux. So I we had a quick talk about Alpine or Linux before this chat started recording. So a few of us know Linux. So you have like Ubuntu, you have like ones like that. You can get images for those kind of like systems where they're running Ubuntu as a base image, and then you install your Docker stuff on top. But they tend to be quite big. With Alpine Linux, it's like 50 megabytes in size, so it's really good for like building your app on top on. It means that I can pass my little Rails app onto someone else, and it'll be great. It'll only be like few hundred megs. So if they're on rubbish internet, it'll be fine. Don't worry if this terminology kind of bushes you a bit. It's once you play around with Docker a bit more, you'll kind of just see these words like kind of floating about, and you'll probably feel a bit more confident and happy. So, how do we use Docker? So, the first thing you got to do is download the software. So it's available for Mac, Windows, and Linux. On Linux, it's like a bit more of a terminally setup. On like Windows and Mac, there's a desktop app which is quite nice. But once you've downloaded it, you'll if you're on Mac at least, you'll get this really nice user interface where it will tell you all the images you've downloaded, all the containers you're running, and you could potentially control them using a nice GUI, which I really like. And also in terminal, it'll add the Docker method or the Docker function in there, which is like really magical. It lets you run all these things. And I kind of said Docker help in there because there's a lot to it and I can fit it all on one slide because it does an awful lot of stuff. But I'm going to cover the basics in this. So let's say you have a computer where it's a fresh install. You've just installed Docker and you want to run the latest version of Ruby. You could go out and install, I don't know, RBEM, AFTF, RVM, whatever, go through all those steps, and it'd be a work. Or if you just want to really quickly use Docker or use Ruby in Docker, you can say, hey, Docker run dash dash RM. Dash dash RM means remove it once it's done. IT means let me interact with the terminal. And then you've got the name here, which is the name of the package, which is Ruby 3.0 and then the Alpine flavor, which is pretty much a 50 meg image. And then you can run like Ruby right there in your terminal. It'll just work. It just downloads it and then you can run it. So this is really cool. I get really excited about this one command like ridiculously because I remember installing Ruby when I was like a green like a green horn wet behind the ears kid, and everything was errors everywhere and all this stuff. Now we can do this if we just want to teach someone a little bit of Ruby, and that's amazing. And I'm really excited by that. Like we don't have to go through all these like elaborate steps. We could just go install Ruby and have it pulled down. It's ready to go. They could start running it without any effort. Okay, cool. Or we could go a bit further. We could create Docker files. And these are like the steps to create a machine, which is perfect for your app. And these are even more exciting. So these are the bee's knees. So we're going to start with that familiar thing, which is the Ruby through. That's the base package we're going to have to start with. So the base image is we're going to have a computer image, which is like Ruby 3.0 Alpine, really thin. We're going to install some extra packages here. So yarn. So we have yarn available. We're going to copy some stuff. It's not like uninterpretable, this file. And we're going to go through, we're going to run bundle. This is going to create a little snapshot of like the perfect image for running our app. So, and this is like really cool because once you built all this stuff out, I can push it up to Docker Hub, which is like GitHub for Docker images. Someone else can download it and just run my app. So I could have like a nice isolated contained app where I could just have pass it to a friend and they can just run it. And that's really exciting. Like we don't have to mess around with like complicated like install scripts or setup stuff. We could just be like, hey, here's the perfect image for running my app, or here is the app in one container image, and it'll be perfect. So I'm really excited about that as well. And yeah, I kind of mentioned you can push stuff up and down. So if you want to like build this Docker file, you go into the directory, you run docker build dash dash tag local my app latest. That's going to build that image. It's going to go through each one of these steps, build you an image at the end, and then you can just run it locally using Docker run, and you just put that image name you just tagged above it, and then you can obviously push and pull it as well to Docker Hub. So I could push it up, and then my friend can pull it down, which it's just so cool. It's so cool. Like, yeah, but it could be easier. Like, there's this tool called Docker Compose, and it's like syntactical sugar around this, and this makes me happy because potentially we could get to a point where if you've set up your app correctly, you could have people just clone it and just run Docker Compose up, and then it will just turn on everything, and you don't need to do anything else, which is really cool. Like you could have like the most junior dev, and as long as they know how to do this one command, they can get working. That's like it's exciting. I'm really excited by it. So how does Docker Compose work? Well, you have a Docker Compose YAML file, and you say, well, I need a Postgres version 2.3 Alpine. That's going to download Postgres. We're going to share some data, and we're also going to say, hey, build dot, which means go build the nearest Docker file in this directory, and then share some data, and then it'll just spin up and start like making the app work in like port 3000. And this is cool, but also it's bringing all the services it needs. So if you need Redis and Postgres and Elasticsearch, you just define it in here, and then you have that all locally, which is really cool. You don't have to dick around with like installing all these dumb services. And then once you're done with your app, you can just turn it all off again. And if you only work on this app for like 5 minutes, then it's fine. You don't have to waste lots of time setting things up. So I got very excited by Docker Compose because I had to do a WordPress piece of work quite recently where I needed MySQL and like a WordPress image. I didn't know how to run WordPress locally. I didn't want to install PHP as well. Like I was very like, I do not want this on my system. I don't even know how to install Apache these days. I'm so like whooshed on it. But WordPress has like they've published an image where they maintain all their files and you just sync like the WordPress content file and that's it. And you just run this command and it will just turn on. And that got me really excited because I was like, well, we could potentially have that for Rails as well, where maybe it shares a few other folders, but we could have like the base Rails stuff come along and it's good to go. You share your like your app folder and maybe your migrations, and you could have like a really perfect, good to go Rails experience. So yeah, I got really excited by this. And it kind of shows how easy it is. It's not like unapproachable either. You just create this file and then bam, you've got WordPress running locally, and you could do that for any technology. And yeah, all you have to do is run Docker Compose up, and there it is. Like this says, okay, I'm going to turn on Postgres, I'm going to turn on the web, and hey, that's very familiar. Where it says Puma's running, and I'm on port 3000. Go there in your browser, and it'll be good to go. So yeah, that's exciting. And I also like Docker Compose because you can just go into those various containers and run specific commands. So if I want to go in there and have a look at what files are there, I can go Docker Compose run web bash, and then that'll give me a nice bash interface, or I can just do like the various bash commands, and It's kind of a bit like Heroku, where it's an inferic file system. So if I delete everything, it'll be fine. It'll survive. I can just bring another one up again. I can also run one-off commands through the same thing, which is yeah really cool. Like it's kind of like running stuff on Heroku locally, and yeah, really magical. I really like it. I think there's a lot of potential there for like just a really simple user experience. And also, if you just like one other thing I do, so you're probably thinking like, I'm sure some of you are quite experienced Rails developers where you're like, well, I actually have everything installed locally. Um, what you can do is just use Docker Compose to turn on just services. So I mentioned earlier, I worked on an app where we had different versions of like Postgres being run in the office. So if we had used just Docker Compose and said, hey, everyone run the same version of Postgres, please, I think that would have at least saved our ass quite a few times. I think that's yeah something else quite cool you can do. So you don't have to use all of Docker. You can just run services, and I like that. Cool. And I'm sure some of you have used VS Code as well. If you haven't, give it a look. It's quite nice. It's made by some new boys called Microsoft. I think they might be going places. So in VS Code, if you have like Docker files, you get like extra context menus in the menu, and you can just turn it on. Like right click and click go. You don't even have to touch terminal to turn on like a Rails app now, which I think is again really cool. Like we can make it easier to get going with Rails and reduce that learning curve for lots of people who maybe just need to get going, or even experienced people jumping onto older projects where you maybe just need to make a few changes. You don't even have to like jump into terminal, which so cool. So as you can tell, I really do like Docker. I think it's really gonna like make a lot of people's lives a lot better, but there are drawbacks. So if you're running Mac OS, you're going to have a bit of a you need to at least 16 gigabytes of memory right now. It's getting better, like progressively every month it gets a little bit better. And on the latest Mac M1s, the Docker's actually running quite well now, so that's quite exciting. But it's still very resource intensive. If your machine is like you are running little machines and you like little VMs ultimately, and they're cool, but it's not as fast as running natively. So maybe you might just use it to turn on services and run Rails in like the bundle X exec Rails S, and then maybe use Docker just to turn on the services just to get the most out of it. You may even want to just like turn on a cloud service and run your Docker stuff there if you're on like Mac, just to keep it off your current system if you really want to have a lot of fun. And also, like I showed that preview earlier of like what the Docker UI looks like, and I'm going to jump back to it. This one, and you'll notice it says like total size like 2.79 gig. It does actually eat up quite a lot of disk space because it literally caches quite a few things locally, like all those images. It saves them there. Again, the space isn't that expensive, but over time, like one day you'll clear it out and you'll be like, wow, I just gained like 50 gigabytes because it had downloaded so much stuff. But you can clear it up as you go. But I like it. So what are the other drawbacks? So I was watching Nick Taylor, he works at Forum. He was kind of pairing with someone and they were setting up Docker, and he kind of checked out the works on my Docker. So it's not like a silver bullet to fix everything, but I think it generally does solve most problems. And generally, if you get the configuration right, you can solve it. And then once you get past the initial tech hurdles, you'll be pretty happy. And that is me done. I'm Mike Rogers. Make sure to give me a follow on Twitter. I do actually have like a little project I want to push as well while I'm here. Let me go into that. I have a little starter kit called Docker Rails template. And this is kind of like a bunch of learnings I had from when I was basically playing around with Docker, doing it locally. And I learned like a few things about all the things I might need for a Docker file for running Rails. So obviously running Alpine, installing a bunch of packages, doing loads of extra configuration to make things perfect. Don't go through those pain cycles. Just copy my thing. You can just copy and paste these files into your Rails apps and it will work. I think I even have a template somewhere. Let me have a quick look here. Yeah, Docker generator. Yeah, I have a little template thing where you can just copy. You can copy this command, and it'll just copy in those Docker files, and it'll just work. Probably. And I'm looking for help on that project. So if anyone wants to try it and if they find bugs, just submit a pull request. I'll be really thankful.